Order. Well, good morning, colleagues, and we are very pleased this morning to have one of our one-off sessions on the working of the Department, the working of the Northern Ireland Office. We're joined by the Secretary of State and two of his key lieutenants as far as the officials are concerned. So, Secretary of State, probably just for the record, if you could introduce your team. The floor is yours for a minute or so to give us a little update, and then if you can avail yourselves of our tender mercies, we would be obliged.
Yes, tender mercies in abundance. Excellent. On my left, I have Brendan Thruthall, who is the DG for Union and the Windsor Framework, not from the NIO, but from the Cabinet Office. And on my right, the NIO's Director of Strategy, Chris Flatt, who will ably assist me and answer all the tough questions, so I can just do the easy ones. And Chair, thanks very much indeed for the invite to be here this morning. I've been Secretary of State for just over a year now, and I'm very proud of what my department has been able to do so far. Quite a lot has happened in that time. And since I last saw you, I mean, obviously the legacy legislation has passed this place, but we've also had and working alongside the Department for Business and Trade, we welcomed over 180 international visitors to, and yourself, of course, to an investment summit in September. The summit, the first of its kind, was unprecedented in terms of size and scale, and I think everybody there appreciated it was a hugely successful event and a starting point for securing multiple transformational investments in Northern Ireland over the next few years. Now, obviously, the United Kingdom is a union of people who share cultural, social and economic ties that bring us together and make us more prosperous and secure. And our nation is at its strongest when its institutions work well, work together and deliver real change on the issues that matter. Now, the Investment Summit saw that Northern Ireland has huge potential. But it is important, in fact crucial, that it also has strong devolved government working to make the most of the opportunities that fall its way and ensure prosperity in the long term. And on that, I continue to engage regularly with all the Northern Ireland parties, and work is continuing to provide a sound basis for devolved institutions to be restored.
Thank you, Secretary of State. And for what it's worth, can I offer this committee's both thanks and congratulations to you and other government colleagues for that investment event. I think you're right, it sort of pulled together a huge degree of optimism in and confidence about Northern Ireland, and it was great to see. And of course we've had another American delegation this week as well, which hopefully will also bear fruit. And I think the New York State Pension Fund is investing
$50 million,
yes.
$50 million, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's about £40 million, isn't it? Which is a fairly considerable sum of money. So the indicators are looking good. I wonder if I could just ask you to shoot a fox that started running around earlier this week, which has caused some consternation in and around Northern Ireland. That fox is the supermajority retrofit. Are you in a position to shoot it?
Yes, I think I probably am. I've even got some language somewhere in here. Yes, is the obvious answer. I can absolutely shoot it. I'm pretty sure that you'll find that my department very quickly clarified the statement on Monday, and the comments should not be considered any shift in government policy. I'd just like to assure the committee and all that serve on it that the government is unwavering in its commitment to all strands of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, not least the principle of consent and the need to exercise parity of esteem for the identity, ethos and aspirations of both communities. The agreement's clear that any change to the constitutional position of Northern Ireland would require the consent of a majority of its people. In fact, the agreement makes clear that it would be wrong to undertake any constitutional change without this fundamental principle of majority consent. And in accordance with that principle of consent, Northern Ireland will remain part of the United Kingdom for as long as its people wish it to be. And we're absolutely clear there is no basis to suggest that a majority of people in Northern Ireland wish to separate from the United Kingdom. Is that clear enough?
I'm very grateful to you for both the succinctness and clarity, Secretary of State. And that fox has now not just been shot, but stuffed and mounted. You regularly update Parliament, the media, and other fora of indicating significant progress with talks, not exclusively, but predominantly with the DUP, to restore Stormont. We then get some sort of rebuttal stuff, which is, well, nobody's talking to us, and we're nowhere near making a resolution to this, etc. And for the outside world, those twin analyses are quite difficult to reconcile from time to time. So in the privacy of these four walls, are you able to give us a robust and frank update with regards to where you think things are at, and a timetable to which you have got sketched out in your mind? And I know as a Secretary of State you don't like putting end dates, and no Secretary of State does, but are things imminent? Are we looking well into next year?
So I will be very, forgive me for being circumspect and fairly careful
yes,
what I say, because
I'd expect nothing less.
I try not to talk about the ongoing conversations that are happening and are important, because my primary focus, the department's primary focus, is to get the executive back up and running. So so the people of Northern Ireland have decisions being taken for them by people they've elected to take those decisions. I mean, we've had long and ongoing talks over the summer, and actually I will, if I may, use this occasion to thank my civil servants and all those that have been working. I know you'd expect them to work hard over the summer, but who have been working hard on this over the summer, and our interlocutors, and all the party leaders who I've been trying to keep updated as best I can without disclosing the nature of the talks. But I've characterised it, and I think it is true, that they are in their final phases, and in a much more positive space than they've been previously.
There's a King's speech due shortly, a couple of weeks. There has been some call for some sort of legislative reassertion of the integrity of the union. If I sort of slightly paraphrase, but in broad terms, that's my understanding. I appreciate you can't, you won't be in a position to tell us the contents of the King's speech, but is legislation part of the arsenal to move things forward?
Yeah, I've always, the ask has always been that it is, and I've always said that if we can get that legislation correct, then we will introduce it. But it's got to be within the framework that I've equally always said, that it has to chime with. In fact, it answers. I could give the answer to the first question you asked me about supermajority. It has to sit within that framework, and until I know it is actually the answer, part of the answer to the question, it doesn't exist, as it were.
Just on that, one can hear sort of the leader of the House and PBL and others saying, we're obviously coming to the end of this Parliament. There's a general election imminent. We know that, more than likely to take place at some point next year. Huge pressures on Commons time, parliamentary time, to pass legislation. PBL and others surely will be saying to you, look, we're likely to have primary legislation for the appointment of a permanent chief constable. There may very well be requirements for other, in inverted commas, emergency legislation relating to Northern Ireland in the absence of Stormont's functioning. You're having a laugh, Secretary of State. This is them talking to you, not me talking to you. You're having a laugh, Secretary of State, if you think you're going to get legislative time in the King's speech as well.
So, in those conversations, and as you would expect, the Leader of the House, on behalf of PBL, writes out to all departments saying, what are you likely to, what you bid for in the King's speech. And my department, whilst not having much legislation that it has bid for, has had to pass a huge amount of legislation during the course of the last year. Lots of it in the urgent space, and you could say that adds emphasis for the need to get the executive back up and running, because nearly all of it has been because the executive isn't in place. Now, actually, I do not need primary legislation for the appointment of a permanent Chief Constable.
Okay, I think there was a general thought that there was.
We have a piece of primary legislation that we have already passed that gives me the powers to do that by secondary legislation. However, again, this is definitely not ideal. The person who should be doing that, after the Police Board of Northern Ireland has come to its determination as to who it wants to appoint, should be a Minister for Justice.
Thank you. I'm grateful. Let us now turn to Jim Shannon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and nice to see you, Secretary of State. We have two issues I want to bring to your attention, if I can. I know that in correspondence and discussions in the Chamber you've had with my friend and colleague, the member for Belfast East, has been on the funding formula. I've noted your comments in the past, which seem to indicate that you probably will have a strong agreement for the points that I'm going to make. But I suppose the question I want to really come to is where are we with that, and how do we make it happen? On the first issue of public sector pay, it's an issue that has been with us for a couple of years now, and I'm the party's health spokesperson, so the issue of wage increases, and even in line with inflation and elsewhere, have not really happened for the public sector. And it was on the TV on the politics show on Sunday morning before I went to church, so I was able to catch up on some of that. But Northern Ireland has 35% more registered nurses per head of population than England. And the Agenda for Change pay review body has estimated the cost of a 1% pay rise to Northern Ireland will cost 6% of what is needed for the same pay rise in England. That's in a way is down to partially to the underfunding of the Barnett consequential. So the first question, Secretary of State, as always, trying to seek an answer that helps the people that I represent back home, and I have a lot of people from in my constituency who are employed in the health sector. What help or assistance can the Secretary of State give and offer to those in the public sector workers to ensure that they get a fair wage increase? And also, when it comes to public services with levels of funding below what we actually need. So the question really is, what can we do to help those in the public sector, in particular the health department?
And thank you, Mr. Shannon, for the questions. And I guess I'll first start by saying thank you to those who've been working in our public sector in Northern Ireland over the course of the time, because they provide excellent public services. And yes, the budgets are pressured at this point in time, but I've got to say, you can only be impressed when you visit hospitals, urgent care centres, schools, as I have done, police stations, as I've done, to see the people continuing about their work in the most professional of ways, when you also know that they have this ask, which is legitimate, in many ways, around pay. The issue is, you'll know, is that I'll talk about the Barnett formula in a second, but the money comes forward in a block grant, and it is up to what would normally be ministers in the executive to determine how money in the block grant is spent, and how much of that would be on public sector pay. And obviously, new monies in pay settlements add to that block grant in some way. But I think it's fair to say that some of these pay deals that have been structured in England have not necessarily all been new money, and so there's a calculation that goes on behind that, which is in individual departments, which is way more complex than I actually understood when I took over this role, to be quite honest. But the Barnett formula just ensures that devolved administrations receive a share of the changes planned in the UK government spending on functions that are devolved, and that's for obviously Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. It doesn't, the formula doesn't recalculate the entire Northern Ireland Executive block grant, but it calculates incremental changes to the block grant over time. Around 90% of Northern Ireland Executive-led public service spending in Northern Ireland is currently financed by the block grant. In the 2021 spending review, the UK government set out at historic levels of Barnett-based funding for the devolved administrations, including the Northern Ireland Executive, providing on average £15 billion per year through the block grant period. It has provided, on top of the block grant, the UK government has provided over £7 billion in extra funding since 2015. It's obviously and importantly entirely a matter for the executive as to how it spends the funding it receives through Barnett consequentials from the operation of the Barnett formula and the block grant. And they are not ring-fenced for any particular purpose, which is one of the things behind your question, Mr. Shannon, I completely understand, is when there is money that might be deemed for pay that is new in England, it just gets put into the sum of money that comes to Northern Ireland and can be spent in any particular way that, if the executive or sitting ministers would choose to, or currently the permanent secretary is taking actions in their place at this point in time. So you ask about the proposals that the Honourable Member for Belfast East has put forward, and he's talked about over time a needs-based formulation for the Barnett formula. I mean, just as I've always said in this space, it's I remain open to discussing proposals put to us on this basis, but it is not and will not be a silver bullet. And a returning executive, even if we had done that, will still have to make trade-offs where it's asked, because it will have to decide how to apportion the total sum of money. And indeed, I think it will have to raise revenue as well for public services. As I mentioned in the House when I've been questioned on this, negotiations between the Welsh Government and the Treasury on a fiscal framework, which included an adjustment for the Barnett formula, took place over 7 years. It was a very detailed conversation. And I know that the Honourable Gentleman for Belfast East has said to me, well, if the first one took 7 years, then this one should be quite straightforward because you've got a process. But it took that long because of the consequences for budgets over time, and it's stuff you absolutely need to get right. So it's not an issue that you could solve overnight, even with the best will in the world. And the absence of a functioning executive really does have an impact on what can be done to address these issues of structural reform. So forgive me for harking back to the main point that you've heard me repeat, Mr. Shannon, a number of times, but without an executive in place, it's very difficult to have any of these conversations because you need people who are elected to represent the people of Northern Ireland to be on either around the table with you or on the other side of the table with the Majesty's Treasury to be talking about exactly what's required and how that can work for the future.
Thanks for that, Secretary of State. Of course, as you and I both know, Secretary of State, there is a way forward, a clear way forward, and we put those in through our leader Jeffrey Dawson to Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, and yourself and James Cleverly as well. And we're hopeful that out of those there will be a way forward. And you also said, and rightly said, that if the Executive was back tomorrow, the funding issues would still be top of the agenda when it comes to where we are. My honourable friend, the member for Belfast East, put forward the suggestion that the Treasury contribution to fund public services in Northern Ireland is going down rather than rising. Quite simply, in England up to 2025, spending will increase by 6%, but only 3.6% in Northern Ireland, which in real terms means that every person in Northern Ireland, every 1.95 million people live in Northern Ireland, each one of those are £2,000 less better off than what they are in the mainland when it comes to spending in real terms. And if we follow the trajectory of what that means, and your answer to the first question in relation to the public sector pay requests for nurses and indeed all civil servants, it means that by the end of this decade that the trajectory will mean that public services will be undeliverable if there isn't a change done on the Barnett consequential funding issue. My honourable friend, and a question to yourself, Secretary of State, and for East Belfast, referred to the fact that Wales's block grant back in 2010, a report found that the Barnett consequentials for them had to be changed. There's a precedent for change within the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland for the Barnett consequential, in particular for us in Northern Ireland, but the example is Wales, where it was changed for the very purposes. And what I feel that needs to be done is a change for Northern Ireland that's similar to what is happening in Wales. The precedent's been set, the system is in place, the technical way to do that is also in place. And I suppose in this final year of this government, in this term, I'm ever mindful that there's still a possibility and a methodology of changing that Barnett consequential in a way that would make it more beneficial for people in Northern Ireland. I would address the public sector pay issue. It would address the funding and the shortfall in funding. And I know, as I believe that Northern Ireland is a very integral part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But to make that happen, we also have to have the fairness and the equality in the funding system as well. So the question really is, would the Secretary of State be instrumental in pushing for that change within Treasury and the Barnett consequential, and to bring in similar reforms for the funding model in Northern Ireland? And would the Secretary of State perhaps also agree that the Northern Ireland's financial arrangements should operate on the basis of assessed need?
Yeah, so I thank the Honourable Gentleman for those questions. And the answer is, I mean, there's a whole host of different points or different parts to the answer. Firstly, he will understand that Northern Ireland, through the block grant, does get legitimately, and sometimes it is difficult for MPs in other areas of our nation to quite understand, who might not remember the history of Northern Ireland as well as members of this committee. But for very good reason, gets more per capita from the state than say any part of England, and the extra monies I've talked about, the £7 billion, are also where things have been legitimately funded in the past on top of that level of funding. Now, so it's recognised by the government that Northern Ireland needs that extra money for a whole host of reasons, historic and otherwise. The question is how, one of the reasons it took the Welsh Government so long to find its solution is, and this was an elected, devolved government who had spending priorities as well that it wanted to invest in, that were decided, you could say, were decided by election, and therefore came to the government saying these were the needs of the Welsh people. Now, I don't have that interlocutor. I do not have an elected executive with a programme for government that has a plan attached, that I would, in that situation, happily be sitting beside those who wanted to take that to Treasury and make their case. I'd be happily in that position to do so. So we're just. I completely understand the question you make, and I'd love to be in that position, Mr. Shannon, but I'm not. What I have to work with is the spending in Northern Ireland as it is. The permanent secretaries, the Northern Ireland Civil Service, they know what their current spending levels are, but in kind of future terms, they don't know what the political decisions of ministers would be, and so it's a very kind of level, unchanging playing field on spend. And if I may, I just want to kind of remind the committee about, I mentioned the figure on top of the block grant, £7 billion has been spent or given to Northern Ireland but for good reasons over the course of the last 8 or 9 years. 2 billion within New Decade, New Approach, of which New Deal was 400 million, City and Growth Deal 617 million. You've got Levelling Up Fund of 149 million, Community Ownership 4.3 million, Community Renewal Fund of 12.3 million, UK Shared Prosperity 127 million, with a confidence and supply piece that he'll recall of £1 billion, of which Peace Plus, again, 730 million, which maybe we'll talk about later, because that's a huge, a very important sum of money that has just been agreed with the Irish government and our European Union partners to continue to spend on decent projects. Fresh Start Stormont House Agreement, 2 billion. If you wanted, you could add in the COVID-19 funding on top of all this of 5 billion, and the cost of living payments that we've also contributed of 900. There is a general understanding that Northern Ireland is it needs the extra money, and the extra money is there, but it is vitally important for those conversations to be based on fact and the will of the people as related by elected ministers in an executive.
I think, Secretary of State, I recognise very much the commitment central here for government when it comes to the spending, and no one denies that, and we appreciate that very much. I think the point I'm trying to make, while some of those monies that are referred to didn't all just come to Northern Ireland alone, the Barnett Consequential also got to give it to Scotland and Wales. The COVID thing was monies which we eternally appreciate what government and the Prime Minister at that time did. And enabled us all to survive a very, very difficult time. But the block grant, and you're right, Secretary said, the block grant has treated Northern Ireland generously in the past, but it's below the UK government's own definition of needs since 2022, so it hasn't kept pace, is the point I'm trying to make, and the point that my honourable friend for Belfast East has referred to. The Holton formula is the methodology. It's already been defined. It is clearly the solution. It didn't take Wales a long time to work things out. So the system that I referred to, where things have moved forward quickly, the formula was defined almost right away. It was not used for a number of years because it didn't need to be. The issue for us is we've been underfunded since that time of 2022. As our population has increased, and our population, as you know, Secretary of State, has increased by 200,000 people in the last 10 years, by a significant population increase, and we're very welcome. It's very welcome to have people coming to Northern Ireland and want to live there and want to remain there. But it does and it is an anomaly which really clearly needs addressed. So again, Secretary of State, I asked the question because I think it has to be asked. If we are falling behind, and the stats and the figures indicate that in Northern Ireland, and if government was able to find a formula of change for Wales which has been proven and has worked, then surely it is a solution and a methodology to take it forward on those grounds. And as I said earlier on, the Heaton formula is and has been already defined. It is a solution. The methodology of going forward is simple. We just need your help, Secretary of State, in the position that you hold to ensure that formula is changed, and Northern Ireland's 1.95 citizens receive the same formula as the rest of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, I just clarify, you wouldn't want the same formula as the rest of the United Kingdom, because that would invariably lead to less money coming to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has a special case. It's a needs-based formula.
I understand that.
That is the question that the member for Belfast East has raised. And just again to clarify, in their report published in May 2023, the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council acknowledged that Northern Ireland is currently receiving the funding it needs through a combination of the Northern Ireland Executive Block Grant, locally generated revenue and additional UK government funding packages. And actually just to make the point about how it does fluctuate, its Fiscal Council suggests that block grant funding to Northern Ireland Executive is currently around 20% higher than the equivalent UK government spending in England, but will rise in 24-25 to 25% higher, and then come back down a bit after that. But on his very straightforward and reasonable question, I guess I have to put the caveat in that devolved administration funding is, of course, a matter for the Treasury to discuss. But the government, of course, remains open to discussing proposals put to us by the Northern Ireland parties. But I'll just go back to what I said earlier. This would not be a silver bullet. It would. There is no silver bullet in relation to funding. And realistically, a combination of measures, including revenue raising and other strategic decision making on spending, choices being made by elected ministers, used in conjunction with each other, are necessary to ensure the sustainability of public services and public finances. But as I have said to on the floor of the House in this committee, and to the honourable member concerned himself, I'm always happy to discuss these matters, but we need a reformed executive.
Last point, Mr. Chairman, just very quickly. And the Heaton form.
Jim, just in the interest of time, let's move on to Stephen, because Carla's indicated she wants to come in as well. Stephen.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good morning to the Secretary of State and the rest of the team. Just to pick up on the issues around finance. I have to say, I have not seen Northern Ireland in as dysfunctional state and a situation of despair at any time over the past 25 years. And there is deep worry in terms of the implications for our public services, in terms of both the current situation and what may come on the current trajectory. In terms of the point around the fiscal floor and just very briefly to come back on a couple of points. The Fiscal Council, which you cited, Secretary of State, they currently estimate that Northern Ireland is potentially losing out between £300 and £400 million per year due to the assessment of need. I mean, do you accept that is essentially what they are arguing? And to put it in context, I mean, that would be greater than the overspend that occurred last year, just in terms of one of the past few financial years.
The overspend was 257 last year, and on the Fiscal Council estimate?
So, I mean, the Fiscal Council's done its work. We've seen it. We would probably want to make our own assessments of it, and you'd clearly need to see what that would work out as. it might be in some years sort of figures of the area that you're talking about, but that depends on whether you agree with all of their calculations, and some of them I think we'd want to look at.
We actually think they're undershooting in some respects. We actually think the figures are worse.
And this is why the process of discussion...
They're actually conservative in their estimates in some respects.
This is why the process of discussion around working that sort of thing out takes the time that the Secretary of State mentioned, because there are different ways that you can interpret some of these issues. It will require a lot of careful time on both sides to make sure it's something that we all agree with. And the thing is, when you make a change like this, it has long-term implications, and it's really important to make sure you understand those, because you don't want to make the wrong assessment that has the wrong outcomes for this. So we have, and it's not just the fiscal floor, there's the wider fiscal framework. There are agreements in place with the Welsh Government and the Scottish Government. So the UK Government, the Treasury, has shown that they are able to make these sort of arrangements, but they are, as the Secretary of State said, agreements between the government and another government, in the Scottish Government or the Welsh Government. So we need an executive in place to have those discussions with. I mean, the £300 to £400 million you talk about. Another figure that's been talked about is the fact that in Northern Ireland, super parity measures, the payments that are either extra services provided or things not charged for amounts to around £600 million. And the overspend last year of £257 million was only after significant intervention by the Secretary of State to bring down an initial predicted overspend of twice that amount. So we've had to take serious interventions. Meanwhile, permanent secretaries in Northern Ireland are working really hard in really difficult circumstances to manage this year's budget. So there is a really challenging situation in public services in Northern Ireland. There's a really difficult budget to manage. As the Secretary of State says, that the fiscal floor is not the answer to this on its own.
Fully accept it's not a response in isolation, but I would suggest it probably is structurally the biggest challenge facing Northern Ireland's funding over the decades to come. So I think it is something that needs to be very much top of the pile for discussions. Now, Secretary, just to follow up on two things that Mr. Flatt raised there. He rightly stressed the importance of having a functioning executive to work with in this regard. To take you back to your comments at the British Irish Association, which are in the public domain, in your speech in Oxford, you were very clear in shooting down the notion of a financial package. But can I clarify that comment is in the context of the current dispensation, but in the context of a restored executive, that there is a willingness on the part of the government to work with the incoming executive on the potential for a financial package for Northern Ireland, to both first of all stabilise the current funding crisis, but also then to look perhaps more importantly for transformation in terms of invest to save, because you can't turn public services around in constantly declining budgets where you're firefighting. You need the space and investment to make things more sustainable. So, I mean, is that something that you are willing to do on behalf of the government with a restored executive?
Yeah, and I think I've said it a number of times, but it does need a restored executive. The negotiations, the talks that we're having with the DUP about going back into the executive are around quite strict parameters, but with a restored executive, with the parties coming together on a programme for government, then I think it would be the right thing for certainly me to do, and it'd be a pleasure to do it. And it just there is an extra piece to this, because and it's just to emphasise the need for not just a plan, but the political will to do it. Because the Fiscal Council that we've talked about also has highlighted the need to address system inefficiencies to maximise the quality and quantity of services that can be provided within existing budgets. Now, I think it was mainly referring to health in that space, and actually it kind of almost a response to nothing happening after the Bengoa report that stressed the need to embrace transformation. So, like any, everybody understands the need. I've met with the health unions, and they've told me, they can see the need for quite radical reform in health services, and I think most parties agreed with the general proposals behind the Bengoa report. But then 6 years on from that, we've yet to see the executive deliver that transformation, and despite the UK government providing additional funding for health transformation in that time, and we've provided 200 million for health transformation through the Confidence and Supply Financial Annex, and another 245 million for through New Decade, New Approach, and to the executive for these purposes, and yet we're still in this place. So having a proper plan is really important.
Yes. Well, can I concur with a few things you've said? That first of all, we have to learn lessons from previous financial packages in terms of what didn't happen in terms of aspects of delivery. I think secondly, there will be a need for some degree of conditionality in terms of any negotiated outcome. I think that has to be understood. And thirdly, I think, yes, we have to see a situation where all parties are bound in to a plan, and we don't see a situation where people peel off and play their own individual agendas around this. Can I just draw you out just to fully confirm that there isn't any current discussions with one party around a financial package, and that any financial package can only be agreed with all of the executive parties together?
Yep, I've said that all the way along, and we're talking about the issues, quite right, understandable issues that unionist politicians have had with the Windsor framework and how we can solve those.
I suppose that's the more benign scenario where we have a restored executive. Could I ask you finally, in the context where we don't see restoration over the coming months, and we then head into the next year's financial cycle, I'm currently conscious that, albeit in what we maintain is a flawed budget settlement to begin with, but nonetheless, we're seeing a situation where there is already a very significant overspend factored in, which I don't think can be now addressed in year. There's also huge pressures that are built up, not least around public sector pay, where we have seen settlements in Great Britain which haven't been mirrored in Northern Ireland, and obviously that's a huge frustration and concern to a lot of public sector workers. What then happens in that situation if there isn't an executive with which you can negotiate a financial package?
Well, in many ways, we continue I'd like to think we will get to the point where we have an executive back up and running, to be quite frank, because I can't believe that the issues that we are seeing now in the National Health Service provision, in education, and a whole host of other areas can continue to outweigh the issues. I understand the principal issue with the Windsor framework, but the Windsor framework in operation terms, I'd like to think is working smoothly, and lots of the issues that people thought were coming would not come. So there's I think we can get there. The talks have been productive over the course of the summer. As I say, they are continuing. I believe they're in their final phase. I'd like to think we can get to that place, because what I would like to see is party leaders coming together and the British government working with them to make sure we can properly stabilise the finances of the Northern Ireland Executive. And as I've said previously, I think that includes, and will have to include, elements of revenue raising as well. And Mr. Farry, you'll know that I haven't got powers to do anything other than consult on revenue raising measures for Northern Ireland, but I've instructed departments to consult in, I believe, 7 different areas, which I can provide detail, or 8 areas about revenue raising, but only to consult, so that hopefully a returned executive can look at the full gambit of options available to it And I'll just detail them very quickly. The introduction of domestic water and associated charges, increasing university tuition fees and associated repayment period to the same level of England, including the CFRE tuition fees, introduction of prescription charges, introduction of domiciliary care charges, retention of hospital car parking charges, review of rate relief schemes, introduction of private street fees, and reducing compensation rate on bovine TB programme. All those matters are now, the consultation dates are dependent on the readiness of the individual Northern Ireland departments, but and there'll be 12-week consultation periods, but we're also making sure essentially the full financial picture both on both sides of the ledger can be available to an incoming executive.
If I may just ever so briefly, Chair, just make 2 points to push back on the revenue raising. In theory, revenue raising can be a part of the mix, but I think there is concern and scepticism about doing these almost as the singular solution to the financial crisis that faces Northern Ireland at present, and also the lead-in time in terms of both legislation and for which you could actually begin to actually do any of those charging would actually be several years, certainly in the case of water charges, and at least 18 months in terms of tuition fees, so they're not really an immediate solution in terms of any of the current pressures we're facing.
That is absolutely true, but we're hoping to build a picture for a returned executive so it has all the facts available to it.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Secretary of State and team for coming before us today. Just in relation to the funding, so trying to get through all of what has already been said, you would agree, Secretary of State, that Northern Ireland is not funded to the same level of need as Wales, etc.?
No, it's funded differently to Wales, because, as we've described. Wales and Scotland have a different needs-based formula that the governments of Wales and Scotland have agreed with the Treasury. Northern Ireland doesn't have that. It has essentially what was agreed previously to that, which is the block grant in the form it is in.
You would agree then with the Fiscal Council that Northern Ireland is being underfunded in comparison to Wales and Scotland, who both have the luxury of a needs-based formula?
It's being differently funded, and the Fiscal Council in 2023 said Northern Ireland was getting the money it required.
Well, the Fiscal Council have made very, very clear that Northern Ireland is being underfunded, and there's already an on-the-shelf mechanism for a needs-based formula. Can the government not just get on with it and do it?
Forgive me, but there isn't an on-the-shelf formula. I've got a sneaking suspicion that Wales and Scotland are very different places to Northern Ireland. I think they have very different histories. Think they have very different backgrounds. They have very different communities, and they have very different needs. And that's why you need politicians that represent those needs, those people, to be involved in that conversation with the Treasury to make sure that if you went down this route of having a needs-based barnetisation, as it were, needs-based block grant for want of a better phrase, that it's the correct one for the future of Northern Ireland. So it's not an off-the-shelf method of doing this.
Well, the Hotham funding mechanism for Wales and Scotland is a UK-defined need, and Northern Ireland is not included in that. And personally, I don't think that's acceptable, and I think the government could very well, through Treasury, get on with funding Northern Ireland on a needs-based formula as per the request.
Forgive me, but who would we talk to in that basis to come?
Well,
who's on the other side?
Treasury can very quickly start to put the wheels in motion for this. So, the mechanisms are already there, and therefore it can proceed. And right across this House, there has been.
I think the Secretary was trying to answer that point. Maybe rhetorically, but he was trying to answer.
I mean, the point I'm trying to make is, and actually, I think most Secretaries of State in UK government would make this point: is you really do need good politicians on one side of the table to be negotiating with Treasury on the other, based on for needs based on, so they can talk about the needs and understand the needs of local people. I'm pretty sure that if you just left Her Majesty's Treasury to it, His Majesty's Treasury to it, and wonderful people that they are that work there, one of the big factors they'd be looking at is all the different measures I just meant in revenue raising, which is why it's very important to have elected politicians representing the people of Northern Ireland involved in that conversation of determining what actually the needs are.
So is your sort of key message on this point in sort of headline terms that the non-functioning of Stormont, the non-existence of an executive in cold practical politics has day-to-day implications and effects?
Well, I'm afraid it does, because there are no ministers actually making decisions, lobbying government, lobbying me to lobby government on the people of Northern Ireland's behalf. What we do have is excellent civil servants in the Northern Ireland Civil Service, making sure public services continue to function in the absence of an executive. Now, I'm not saying, and I know, and I'm quite sure as a politician I've made plenty of mistakes myself, that politicians get these choices right all the time. However, they are elected to make these choices. And so, yes, there is obviously a direct effect on not having an elected executive in this space.
Through the Chair, no one in Northern Ireland is going to disagree with being funded on a level playing field with the rest of the United Kingdom. The Hotham formula expressly covers Northern Ireland, and it's not a Wales needs-based formula, it's a UK-based formula, so therefore it is an on-the-shelf mechanism that could be very quickly picked up and used in Northern Ireland to fund us according to the needs within Northern Ireland. So my plea to the Secretary of State today would be get on with it, because ultimately we have needs in Northern Ireland. Our families in Northern Ireland, our working families, are already paying taxes for services that they deserve to be well funded by this government. And I would encourage the Secretary of State to take action on nurses' pay, because we all know, we can sit and say that if Stormont was back up and running in the morning, everything, the sun would be shining and there would be a silver bullet and everything would be well in the world. That's not the case, because the money's not there. So take, for instance, healthcare workers, take, for instance, the pay for our nurses. The Secretary of State needs to act. We can find money for abortion services, we can find money for casement. In fact, I'll quote, we'll get the money, don't you worry. I think that was one of your quotes on casement. Our healthcare workers, our nurses deserve their pay rise, and without the UK government stepping in and giving that and awarding Northern Ireland the money for that, there is not the money within Stormont to do that. So the takeaway message from today is the UK government need to step up and actually fund our services appropriately.
I think the takeaway message from today is that Northern Ireland needs a reformed executive, so locally elected ministers can take those decisions on behalf of the people of Northern Ireland.
But they need the money to be able to take the decisions. If the money is not there, they can't take the decisions.
I think I heard you certainly intimate in a earlier answer to Mr. Shannon, almost to sort of be careful what one wishes for. That if one was to replicate the formula for Scotland and Wales, because of the different historic specificities of the whole thing, Northern Ireland could actually see a lower sum of money coming to it if all of the specifics of Northern Ireland are set aside.
Well, if you recall, Chair, we in a debate on this in the House, I think the Honourable Member for Aberconwy was in his place, and talked about how actually in Wales this might not have been the silver bullet that everybody said it was, and some of it is obviously down to political choices made by politicians elected at that time. But as I think I hopefully clearly said, this isn't the silver bullet. It could and should be part of the solution, but it does need to be negotiated by, in Wales and Scotland it was negotiated by elected governments to do exactly that, as my colleagues say.
Let's turn to a parliamentary silver bullet. Sir Robert Goodwill.
Thank you very much. And good morning, Secretary of State.
Morning.
The Green Lanes went live on the 1st of October, and you were very upbeat at the Conservative Party conference, stating that 1,600 new businesses had signed up and it was all going swimmingly. How is it working? As I know we've heard, for example, from the British Retail Consortium that the labelling requirements didn't really give them time to get things labelled not for EU. And in other cases, for example, there may be mixed groupage loads, including rest of the world items that aren't on the schedule of items that can come through. So can you give us an update on how well it's working and whether all these people that signed up are actually participating?
Yeah, sure. And I will bring, just give you a bit of a heads up, Thruffle in on a couple of these more detailed points. But just to give you an update, that we've seen clear signs of new traders taking advantage of these new arrangements. For example, significant wholesalers such as Booker have written to their customers noting, and I'm going to quote, that they are now able to bring back some of their favourite products, some of your favourite products that we've had to remove due to the previous Northern Ireland protocol. And so consumers in Northern Ireland are able to see the broader reach of the Green Label, with example, shelf labelling in place in major food service outlets, which were previously excluded from the scope of the old grace periods. I mentioned a number at party conference of the uptake of the UK internal market scheme. The baseline that we use is there were 4,150 active users of the old UKTS scheme. There are now more than, I want to get this figure absolutely right. Okay, sorry, there are now 6,985 authorised UK internal market scheme traders. That's 2,859 new businesses, and yeah, so I would say its operation is going smoothly. The uptake is going well. More people have seen that it's just pretty straightforward to use, and the implementation of the schemes has been welcomed by businesses and representative bodies, including the Federation of Small Businesses. But we do continue to talk to everybody to make sure that any issues that do come up are sorted as quickly as possible. Do you want to talk about the labelling requirements?
Yes, is it individual packs, or is it just the cases that need to be labelled, for example? I wasn't quite clear on that.
It's individual packs for meat products, and then that will be extended next year and in 2025 to other types of products with animal or potential animal health risks attached to them, and then other types of product don't have to be individually labelled. But yeah, I think on labelling we were conscious that was a relatively quick transition on the meat product labelling, but from our perspective we've worked very closely with the retailers. They've reacted very quickly. Some of the major retailers have already rolled this labelling out in stores in Great Britain as well, even though for this first phase it was a Northern Ireland only phase, and then we want to make it a UK-wide solution from next autumn. And we've also introduced now a £50 million reimbursement scheme, which we committed to do in the command paper on the Windsor framework alongside the deal, to say we recognise there's an upfront cost to the labelling, and so we'll create a fund to help cover that for retailers.
In terms of checks, I know the government have always made it clear that they want sort of fairly light touch, but have cases of non-compliance been discovered, either in terms of labelling or goods actually that aren't within the scheme being, I think smuggled's quite too strong a word, but being sort of brought in either by mistake or deliberately?
I mean, there's definitely been cases of non-compliance, but as we've always said, we wanted to deal with this in a very sensible and proportionate way, and so we've been advising those businesses that have maybe got something wrong, how to improve their compliance with the UK Internal Market Scheme, and I think it's fair to say that it's that works.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the rest of the world goods, so goods that have come into GB from elsewhere in the world, not from the EU, there's quite a sort of restrictive list, certainly of meat products. So New Zealand lamb is included, but not Australian lamb. I mean, there's a long list of vegetables which doesn't include potatoes, I noticed, and we do bring potatoes in from places like Egypt and Cyprus. And it includes squash and gourds, but not courgettes, which I thought was slightly strange. Is it intended that we can increase this list, or are there good reasons why courgettes and potatoes produced outside EU or UK are not part of the scheme?
I'll, as a former fruit and veg wholesaler, we'll go through the definitions of those different things, but I'll let Mr. Thrufield answer the kind of detailed question, but the answer is yes, of course we want to increase that list. Mm.
Yeah, I think we're working with the retailers on the additional list. I think beyond, there is still quite good coverage, because anything like, say, something on the fruits list like bananas, which would only be covered by a sort of public health risks, that can move freely within the green lane from wherever it comes from. And any goods that come in, which is a lot really, that are then processed in any form, and then aren't sort of counted as rest of the world movements, so they can move through the green lane as well. But we are working with the retailers, specifically cited the Thai poultry issue, which we're working to get on an expanded list on the meat side, and we're working through the fruit and veg as well to make sure we've got good coverage.
Okay, and I know there's a couple of areas which aren't included. I know Carla's going to mention veterinary medicines later, but one of the big issues we get from farmers in Northern Ireland is to do with pedigree livestock and the requirements if those livestock are sold at markets in GB. So the markets have to, for example, to be export licence and approved by the Animal Plant Health Agency. There's even an onerous process, I'm told, requiring farmers to change their boiler suits and put on different footwear in order to look at Northern Ireland animals in a GB market. So what is the government response to these concerns, and can we see maybe some more movement in the future to allow pedigree breeders in Northern Ireland to fully participate in the GB market?
I think those are easements that were negotiated in a slightly different forum through our colleagues in DEFRA. I'd not heard, to be quite honest, Mr. Goodwill, about the changing of PPE to inspect different animals depending on where they came from and where they were going before. But the answer is yes. We obviously want, in all these areas where there is still work to done, to continue to improve what we have. And the very good thing is that we now are, one thing the Windsor Framework has done, and I think is difficult to dispute, is improve our relationship greatly with the European Union, so we can have these conversations, and we can, in this and other areas, look at how we can improve those mechanisms, make different arguments in different spaces. And I will leave vet meds until vet meds is asked, but I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, I think just on the livestock issue, that's something we've discussed with the Ulster Farmers Union. I've discussed it with the chief vet here as well, and we are drawing up a proposal to how we could help on those movements, the specific auction marks that have been raised, and the process by which we can make sure that pedigree livestock movements are dealt with.
I think the other problem is if the farmer doesn't like the price he's getting or the livestock aren't sold, the difficulty in getting the animals back to Northern Ireland, and that's particularly an issue, and your livestock farming in Northern Ireland is particularly important. There's some very well-established pedigree breeders, and they are at a real disadvantage at the moment, and one I hope will be high on the list of priorities for the government in negotiations.
Very much so, and I guess we should say, I mean, when it comes to the movement of livestock, I mean, there have always been strict rules on the movement of livestock, both within the nations of the United Kingdom and obviously across borders into the European Union. And so some of these things are because of our relationship with the European Union. Some of them are not. Some of them are, hail from domestic law.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
So, just continuing, Secretary of State, on the Windsor framework, it obviously includes mechanisms to deal with regulatory divergence, but these either involve, and I don't use this in a pejorative sense of the term, but behind closed doors discussions amongst officials, such as the EU-UK Joint Consultative Working Group, or are not currently operational because the Assembly isn't sitting. Against that backdrop, what is the government doing or can do to help businesses plan for, manage and mitigate the consequences of regulatory divergence, whether between NI and GB or NI and the EU?
Yeah, I mean, so the framework actually does establish an array of mechanisms to ensure engagement with businesses and that their concerns are heard and raised. And this includes new structured groups, a dedicated special goods body, regular discussions with the Joint Committee chairs and chairs of the specialised committee, all of which is in addition to the regular engagement with businesses that departments conduct in their normal business when having new policies and the like. Now, and obviously the government's general preference, both in the case of Northern Ireland and also in Scotland and Wales, is for a UK-wide approach where this makes the most sense. And we can remain clear on that. But essentially what you're doing here is highlighting the importance of having an Assembly and a functioning executive delivering for the people and businesses in Northern Ireland, because when the institutions are up and running, you get democratically elected representatives in Northern Ireland who will be able to consider any new goods rules that are proposed, consult with businesses and constituents, take decisions on them locally, and reflecting the powerful say that the Stormont break will provide to the institution itself. So there are ways of these conversations taking place, but they are suboptimal without an executive.
Thank you. Carla Lockhart.
Thank you. Secretary of State, what progress is being made on veterinary medicines and an agreement between the EU before the current grace period expires in 2025?
Yeah, so the current grace period expires at the end of 2025. And so during this period of time, up until the end of 2025, there'll be no changes to the existing requirements on the supply of veterinary medicines to Northern Ireland, and businesses should and can continue operating as they have done. Whilst this extension is welcome, the UK government's position remains clear. There needs to be a long-term and a permanent solution which maintains the uninterrupted flow of veterinary medicines into Northern Ireland from Great Britain, on which so many people and businesses rely.
And in relation to this, can you confirm it is around 1,700 products, which equates to about 51% of the portfolio of meds available to Northern Ireland that's affected in all of this?
For the grace period?
Yeah, post grace period there would be about 1,700.
I've not heard that statistic at all.
Yeah, that's not. I mean, we've actually gone out to industry and had a whole set of returns, but they haven't. I think we've only got about just over half of the industry have come back to us on products, so we couldn't confirm that statistic. But that is a statistic that's definitely been put to us as well.
Yeah. My understanding, certainly talking to industry leads, that is, the magnitude of the issue. A lot of concern out there from industry reps, and I would ask today that the Ulster Farmers Union are met on this very specific issue, given the issues that it will cause if it's not resolved. And when we hear the EU saying that there is to be full compliance, it certainly doesn't instill much hope within us for continued negotiations on this. So it is of utmost importance that this issue is taken forward. Just a couple of other things, if I can, Chair, just around the Windsor framework and the silver bullet that it was to be. In relation to a constituent of mine just last week, contacted me. His load of second-hand farm machinery was stuck in Warren Point because it had British soil on the wheels of the vehicles. Do you believe that a fix can be found to this absolutely ludicrous situation? And certainly, in my mind, the Windsor framework hasn't fixed this issue at all. And can we get some reassurances that this issue is being discussed with the EU?
Well, I wish you'd have brought that to me when the business brought that issue to you, because...
Brought to your officials.
But then I'd like to think I'm not aware of that particular issue. So
it's a good point. It's a detailed point. If it's in that, I don't think the Secretary of State can be expected to deal with a piece of.
But it's a bigger point. It is a bigger point, Chair. This is the department. I would be shocked if the officials were not aware that this issue has raised its head again. This happened pre-mitigation. Then there was mitigations put in place in the Windsor framework since its introduction on the 1st of October. Now all second-hand farm machinery dealers are experiencing problems again.
I hand over to my official.
Yeah, so in the Windsor framework, we agreed that we remove this problem of having to have a phytosanitary certificate to prove that there wasn't soil on your second-hand farm machinery. The issue that we've been aware of coming up is what happens if you want to bring your second-hand tractor in, but then sell it on to Ireland and basically mainly to the Irish market, where we've said, okay, well that isn't covered by a Green Lane movement, but we have then been going through a series of scenarios with dealers, the Ulster Farmers Union, DARA colleagues and DEFRA to try and make sure that we're doing that in a way that works for industry. So, I mean, it is the case that if you are bringing in second-hand farm machinery that then is and you're a dealer, and that's clearly then on for onward sale to Ireland because there's a significant number of purchases from there, then that is a movement from Great Britain to the EU effectively and needs to be treated as such. But if you're bringing it in for sale, bringing the second-hand farm machinery in for sale in Northern Ireland to sort of end consumers there, or for direct use by farmers, that's catered for in the Windsor framework. But we are conscious there's lots of different scenarios have been put to us, and we need to make sure we're managing that in a sensible way. Specific cases on the issues at ports I don't think have been brought to our attention, at least in the Cabinet Office, but happy to look into any of those.
Well, they were brought to the attention of officials.
If I might, I have some recent experience. I've recently bought an excavator, and I asked this question because of my interest in this, and they said, well, construction equipment with soil on doesn't have to be cleaned. Farm machine with soil on does have to be cleaned. That's what I was told. I'm not sure if that's correct. But it seems a strange situation to me.
Same soil, different vehicle.
It's not one I've heard of, but it's one that we will happily pick up and take away.
Maybe we could have a note on.
Probably.
That would be helpful.
And Chair, just a final point, just around gardeners and the promises that were made that that all issues were resolved, yet gardeners still can't get certain species of trees brought into Northern Ireland from GB. Also, seed potatoes sourced in Great Britain are not able to be sold in Northern Ireland garden centres nor via mail order, only grower to grower, with consumers missing out on direct access. Personally, I would say the oversell of the Windsor framework and the promises made were misleading, and I would ask, is there any resolve to these issues, particularly for gardeners around hawthorn, hazel, cherry trees, dogwood, that all are not available to people in Northern Ireland?
I mean, the simple answer is I will write to the Honourable Lady with that, because we have, since it came into operation on the 1st of October, a whole host of new freedoms to bring in these things where they were banned previously have come about, and actually we're negotiating, so as the Prime Minister said in his statement back in February, we negotiated a band of the most popular trees that people were asking for, seed potatoes and other things, and the negotiations continue. So we've had a number of extra, I don't know what you call them, species added to the list, but we do have a list that.
Okay. In order to be prudent with time management, if we could have a note, and Secretary, if that could come to the committee rather than just to Ms. Lockhart.
Yeah, of course.
That would
well,
be...
all of those will come to you first, and we'll make sure they go to every committee member.
Hannah.
Thank you very much, Secretary of State. Look, we all hope that Stormont comes back, and I heard your update with the appropriate amount of hope, but we have been let down on this many times before, and the sense of stagnation and frustration in Northern Ireland, Secretary of State, is like nothing I've ever experienced before, and I just think belief in devolution and the sustainability of the region is ebbing by the day, and I think people need to understand what is the plan B if the DUP don't or won't proceed and take seriously their responsibilities to the people of Northern Ireland. So with the appropriate amount of caution and caveat about deadlines, at what point would you decide that the DUP aren't able or serious, and would you intervene to create an alternative process to meet the basic needs of the people of Northern Ireland, and to stop public services and public faith in politics degrading even further?
So, I mean, my primary objective is to get the executive up and running, and I know you'd have heard me say that I'm not keen on talking about a plan B, because it means it almost feels like you've given up on plan A, and I will never give up on trying to get the executive up and running. But at some point there does have to be an evolution of we have to make sure that the Northern Ireland Civil Service is comfortable and it's got the powers that it requires for the decisions it's taking. You'll see each month we publish a list of the decisions taken by the Northern Ireland Civil Service whilst the executive isn't sitting. There are some decisions that we all know the Northern Ireland Civil Service would like ministers to decide on, but I do not have the power to do that, and obviously should I take that power, that would put us into a very different position. Some might say, a community might argue that's heading down a route of that's akin to direct rule in some ways. So there is no ideal solution to this problem. The best solution is the executive coming back.
Well, I agree with that, but previously when we hit a complete stalemate, and we are 18 months into this, and it's like, I know it's like when I ask my teenager to tidy her room, and we're going to do it, and we all go through these periods of optimism where we think that the Assembly's coming back, and hopefully this one is true, but you will be aware of the issues that colleagues have raised about about the finances. We have the issue of Loch Ness just slowly festering beyond redemption if action isn't taken, and many others. Do you foresee a scenario that you intervene, or can you allow this to drift until the next UK general election and the many months after that that it would take? Nobody is asking, well, very few people are asking for direct rule, but there is a growing consensus consensus that some of the standing orders in Stormont could be changed to dial down the emphasis on veto at various points. I think nearly all of the major parties have indicated a willingness to explore those issues, and obviously the agreement did envisage a review. We would all prefer that review to be done in the safety and comfort of Stormont having returned, but there is an anxiety that this will just be allowed to corrode month after month after month on vague promises from the DUP, and I think people need to know that there is a genuine intention to step in and stop this degradation at some point.
Yeah, I completely understand the point the Honourable Lady's making, and indeed I've been written to, I think, by her party and certainly by the Alliance Party as well, about proposals in this space. But I guess I can go back to my original point of clarification to the Chair at the very beginning. The general principle of consent is the DNA and the skeleton of a very important agreement that has brought peace to Northern Ireland over the last 25 years, and changes to it are best come from. And I thank you for saying it as well. But from elected members from Northern Ireland and of the executive and others, I would not be keen to tread into that territory lightly in any way, shape, or form. And I think, which is why my emphasis is on trying to get the executive back up.
It can't be done lightly, and we have continuing problems from the last time it was done effectively behind closed doors with just two parties. If and when that moment arises, how do you see a review on that scale being convened? Would you
go into hypotheticals on this, because that's a rabbit trap, that rabbit hole I don't want to go down.
I just think people in Northern Ireland have lost faith in the DUP's willingness or ability to deliver for them, and they are anxious of any sense that the UK government is interested in Northern Ireland and is interested in preventing this divide, and I think even an understanding that there was engagement on this issue, practically or even intellectually, that there may need to be reforms. As I say, nobody is suggesting that this will be done as a reach-in or a keyhole surgery from the UK government. This should and could be done on a round-table basis. And as I say, all parties at various times have indicated willingness. As you said, we have outlined a relatively modest change to the way a speaker is elected, that it would at least allow scrutiny committees and other things to. We haven't heard that concept being rejected by the DUP, and in fact it would be consistent with their words many moons ago before they collapsed the thing about stepping in and stepping out. But I think the message people will receive is that we are exclusively at the mercy of the DUP, who aren't behaving rationally and aren't behaving in the interests of people in Northern Ireland, and that there is no meaningful intention from the UK government to do anything about it except wait for them.
There is the UK government does not intend to change anything in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement without that debate first coming from the grassroots, the elected people, representatives of Northern Ireland Executive, the Assembly, through proper processes.
I'll leave Stephen to ask you about some of the specific hypotheticals, and you can.
Before we do, I understand entirely the question that Ms Hannah has raised, and I understand entirely, Secretary of State, the answer that you have given to it. But I think that there's a legitimate question from civic society in Northern Ireland. This committee has held 2 engagement events with ordinary folk in Northern Ireland who are probably 5, 6, 7 stages ahead in reform of the institutions of Stormont to help its delivery programme. And we seem rather sort of reticent about it. At what point, because there must be a point, actually no, is there a point, let me ask it this way, is there a point where HMG says the current rules are being deployed, and that's perfectly fine. But the current rules and the impasse are effectively leading to a scorched earth policy in Northern Ireland. No innovation, no transformation, no reform, a downward spiral of public services, a falling back of social mobility, life expectancy, educational attainment, economic development, the list goes on. Is there a point when the government says, well, that situation is sustained because the rules allow it to be sustained? The rules are no longer fit for purpose. The rules need to be changed, not unilaterally, with engagement with party leaders in Northern Ireland, with engagement with Dublin and other interlocutors in that process. But in your thinking, in your philosophical thinking, there must be a point where the computer says no, the rules say no response to a growing clamour of despair from communities across Northern Ireland, across both traditions and none, become so deafening that the defence of them's is the rules is no longer justified, is it?
Well, Chair, I mean, there's an obvious route to demonstrate that there is that cacophony of noise, which is through the ballot box, which every person in Northern Ireland has access to on different occasions, local elections, national elections, potentially MLA elections, the lot. And
are you giving serious consideration to new Assembly elections?
I don't have to have that conversation or thought process for a couple of months yet. And I would wait. I'm interested in this debate. I truly am. But I do believe it's got to be reflected, as you say, you believe it is being reflected across communities, those of either community or none. I would look forward to seeing that debate take shape. But what I do see is a clamour for the executive to go back, without a shadow of a doubt. But in lots of conversations that I've been engaged in, especially with the political parties, and as I acknowledged earlier, I've had conversations with the Alliance Party and the SDLP where these matters of reform have been raised with me. But other parties are not in that space, and the principle of consent remains true.
But the public would have in your assessment, it's a legitimate takeaway from this hearing that testing the mood of public opinion through the ballot box.
I've been well advised in the past that testing the mood of the public opinion through the ballot box only polarises the positions in Northern Ireland at this point. And I'm sure that's been reflected by members of your committee.
Yes, but that then turns your answer to your question undeliverable, doesn't it? Because if you say you want to hear from the communities of Northern Ireland, the best way that they can do it, unless there's a massed letter writing campaign to your office, is through the ballot box. How else would one test the mood of the people of Northern Ireland?
Well, I mean,
with the risk,
with
the risk, you're undoubtedly right, of a deeper orange and a deeper green, of a polarisation response. But almost be that as it may, but if that is a key way of testing the mood, and a concern of polarisation precludes its deployment, it's a decommissioned tool, isn't it?
I always listen to the party leaders when I speak to them, and they speak to me on this matter and others. But on elections, I think there is a general consensus that what I just said to you, that election causes polarisation in Northern Ireland, and that is not good for this process. As you know, I am a massive localist. I believe that local decisions should be taken by locally elected people, and if a debate on this was to come up through the grassroots of Northern Ireland, and I'd be genuinely interested to listen to it and see how it shape form, and indeed reply to it when it got to the point that it was required to. But there are different opinions around this table of the political parties. I also meet with civil society a lot, but I'm very, very wary because each element of civil society I've met in Northern Ireland has a nuanced position, a different position on this particular issue when they raise it with me. And so, it's which is why it's important that it's Northern Ireland voices that start this debate. It's Northern Ireland voices that and elected Northern Ireland voices that nurture it. And it's done with the full understanding of what that actually means in relation to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and any evolution of it.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on the point around consent for various changes, I mean, I would suggest that there is growing evidence from opinion polls that there is considerable support for reform. I mean, I take your point that there may be different emphasis within that, but I think that does seem to be a direction of travel that the people of Northern Ireland are supportive of. By contrast, I don't think, and I'm sure you would agree with the Secretary of State, I mean, there isn't consent for government by civil servant, probably not least by civil servants themselves, and there wouldn't be consent for a move towards direct rule, albeit that may well be something that is inevitable in certain circumstances, albeit with an Irish consultative dimension. Do you accept that the current situation is unsustainable? I mean, the executive formation guidance only allows civil servants to go so far in certain areas. I think their read of it is probably more narrow than the government's reading of that, and I don't think there's a huge appetite from them to have more powers in any event. But I mean, you recognise that there's so many decisions that are piling up that can't be taken at present.
Yes, I speak to individual and occasionally the group of permanent secretaries, and I am aware that occasionally they will write to me asking me to give them a political decision in an area where I have absolutely no power in law to do so.
Would you also accept that reform of these institutions may actually be an easier option in terms of moving away from the previous devolved model than something as dramatic as direct rule would be? I mean, noting that, for example, it was taken out of existence in the aftermath of the Eastern Landers Agreement in 2007.
So I think reform of the institutions would take a long period of time if it's to be done on the basis of consent.
The final thing, I'm not going to go through the various aspects of reform due to time today, Chair, but just to make the point, I mean, we would talk about reform as a means to get the institutions restored, because there are flaws. But would there be common ground in you recognising that even if we get the institutions restored in terms of your Plan A delivering over the coming weeks, that given the lessons of the past few years, where first Sinn Féin have brought the institutions down and then the DUP brought them down more recently, that even restored institutions will be incredibly fragile, and that there does need to be conversations to put them on a more sustainable basis and to stop the cycle of collapse happening again. I mean, maybe put this in a different context. There has been a situation where in previous breakdowns we end up with an agreement, and then the British and Irish governments tend to walk away from the pitch and assume that everything's fine, and then we're back to the next crisis. And then, so do you accept the need, if we get under Plan A restoration, to move away from the cycle of collapse?
I would expect in a reformed executive, a number of the political parties and their representatives in the executive and in opposition to be raising debates on this on the floor of the Assembly and for that debate to take shape.
Sure.
Thank you. Anything further?
That's all.
Thank you. Carla Lockhart.
Thank you. Obviously, there's been much in the media regarding policing. Just keen to understand your assessment of the effectiveness of the Northern Ireland Policing Board, and also just around finances for policing. Obviously there has been a number of issues recently regarding data breaches, etc. There are less boots on the ground with regards to policing in Northern Ireland. I know I'm certainly feeling it in my own constituency of Upper Bann. Neighbourhood teams are diminished, and ultimately they are a key part of the policing operation that happens on a daily basis. Can Secretary of State give us an update with regards to his assessment on those issues?
Yeah, and I think everybody should be aware that the policing board itself has set up a review of its performance in this space. I'm trying to remember who is actually leading that review, but the policing board has set up a review, and I've actually met with a number of the individual members. Or no, I have met individual members of the policing board over the course of the last few weeks, and they are keen to make sure that they are. That they learn the lessons and learn from this. The review's been handled by Pete O'Doherty, the Assistant Commissioner in the City of London Police. And actually, that review goes to the board, reports to the board next month. So it'll be interesting to see what lessons are learnt from the board itself. There's a review of the PS&I service executive team being done by the policing board itself. There's a review of how the policing board discharges its legislative duties, including issues raised by the Scotfield judgment. This was due to be carried out by the Department of Justice, but they don't seem to be approached by the board as of yet. So there are a number of different reviews in the process of being commissioned or commissioned already in this space. Last week I actually met with the interim Chief Constable, John Belcher, who I think was day 2 in his role at that time, and finding his feet. I also met actually with the group of officers who've been conducting the investigation into the breach and all the lessons learnt. And actually they've done an amazing job of trying to learn the lessons of this, what everybody seems to call, and what they call a self-inflicted wound of data being attached to a freedom of information request that should not have been. I'd like to think police forces across the country have also and other bodies, public bodies, have learnt from that too. They took me through how they've talked to any officers concerned, and indeed all matters around the data breach. And the one thing that I have absolutely noticed in the course of all this is, whilst the Police Federation of Northern Ireland quite rightly said morale was low, at a real rock bottom after this. I know you interviewed ACC Chris Todd,
yes,
who I think has done an outstanding job as Gold Commander in this space of both rebuilding morale through conversations, through a process they've set up of any PS&I officer who's had a concern about that data breach, having a number of conversations with others, all the way through to making sure they've actually learnt the lessons for future FOI requests and protecting themselves in the future, to making sure people who've somehow got possession of that data and might want to use it for bad purposes are feeling the full force of the law. You've seen a number of arrests in this space. I've just got to say I've been amazingly impressed by every single officer I've met from the police service of Northern Ireland in this time, because they've continued to go about their jobs brilliantly, professionally, with good results. And I'm very hopeful that the force will be able to rebound from this much, much stronger.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Just to pick up on a couple of things. Obviously, you have mentioned the Schofield judgment, and very serious concerns with that in relation to it evidencing that there is and has been two-tier policing for a number of years within the PSNI. Can you give assurances today that you are monitoring this as Secretary of State, and that there will be money be made available? We heard from Chris Todd, and if my memory serves me right, it was 270 million. I think, wasn't that the?
It was a big number. It was
a big number. I think it was 270 million that will be needed to fill that hole. And when we take the number of police officers that there is none in Garnaville currently being recruited and trained, I have real grave concerns for people out on the streets and the safety in Northern Ireland. Now, that is not to undermine the great work that the officers on a daily basis do. But leadership and government need to get a grasp on this, because it is an issue of national security, and therefore this government needs to step in and ensure that our police service is adequately funded, that there is sufficient police officers out on the beat and doing and keeping people in Northern Ireland safe. So I'm not hearing today any reassurances on that, or any commitments around finances for that?
Possibly firstly because you've just asked the question, and secondly because I actually answered, I think I did a statement on this in the House and talked about the process that goes behind this, and I alluded to part of it. Part of what the PSNI have been doing over the course of the last few weeks and months has been working out if and what these costs will be if and when they materialise, remembering some of these costs that are impossible to work out, because who knows what the Information Commissioner's Office might find and might fine in this space. But then there is a process that I outlined to the House in the statement, which is currently being followed, which is the Police Service of Northern Ireland talked to the Ministry, the Department for Justice and the Department for Finance in Northern Ireland. There's been a number of conversations, I know, in that space. And I know that 2 evenings ago, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, please correct me if I get this wrong, Chris, the Police Service of Northern Ireland sent an estimate of a figure directly to the Treasury and copied in the NIO. So these processes have been happening as I described on the floor of the House, and will continue to happen as you would expect.
And that's in relation to data breach, but obviously day-to-day running of police and the concerns around the numbers. And also just on that point, with regards to safety of officers and officers you have served, this has been raised in this committee time and time again. There's officers can't even get safety measures around their houses because of delays in the NIO's procurement of bulletproof glass and windows and doors, etc. And when I ask for a daily update I'm told by the Minister of State, give it time, give it time. These people live under threat day and daily, and I just don't think that's acceptable. This needs dealt with and needs money associated with it promptly.
Sorry, what was the update you were asking of my ministers from my office?
In relation to, out of today's session, I'd like to know in relation to policing numbers and the efforts that's being made on that, and the finances being made available to get more police out on the beat. And the second thing is around security measures for serving and ex-service serving police officers with regards to security measures not on a daily basis, but regularly. I'm being contacted by people who have been promised items around their house to help with security, and they're stuck in the NIO procurement system. When I ask for regular updates from the NIO on those items, I'm told by the Minister of State, give it time, give it time. And what I'm saying is these people live under daily threat. I don't think the answer, give it time, is adequate. These people need these security measures, and they need them very quickly.
Okay. So two very distinct questions which I'll answer in each part. So PSNI's main funding comes from the Northern Ireland Executive Block Grant via the Department of Justice. In the budget allocations for 2023-24, the Department of Justice was allocated £1.2 billion of resource funding, which is the third largest allocation of block grant funding behind health and education. In addition to the block grant, the UK provides the PSNI with the additional security funding it needs to ensure that it has the resources to tackle the severe threat from Northern Ireland-related terrorism. This additional security funding ensures PSNI's ability to tackle the terrorist threat whilst also going about its business of day-to-day policing and making sure that's not compromised. That contribution for the financial year 22-23 is £32 million, and it's the same as what's been provided each year since 2015-2016, and will continue through to 2024-2025. The policing numbers piece that you mentioned was part of the New Decade New Approach Agreement. The Executive committed to prioritising the increase of 7,500 to 7,500 PSNI officers, and we are committed to supporting the Executive in its commitments through the block grant and direct funding. But the numbers is a commitment by the Executive, and essentially how it's paid for, as I described earlier, is through a block grant, and how that's distributed will be a matter for ministers. The safety of the people of Northern Ireland is obviously a top priority for the UK government and has been all through, but policing, as she knows, is a devolved matter, and is a further example of the pressing need for a locally elected, stable and accountable devolved government which continually prioritises the things that matter in everyday life for the majority of people in Northern Ireland. And I am acutely aware that the regrettable absence of a Northern Ireland Executive and the resultant inability of the Assembly to agree a multi-year Northern Ireland budget exacerbates the systemic and long-term challenges that face all public services, and especially policing, in Northern Ireland. On the Home Protection Scheme, which is an extra statutory discretionary scheme run by my department to provide protection at the homes of individuals engaged in public service who are judged as under increased threat from Northern Ireland-related terrorism, we obviously take our responsibility for protecting people under threat from terrorism very seriously, and we also, and she would not expect me to, comment on specific measures given the personal security considerations for the individuals on this scheme. But where an individual believes themselves to be under threat, it is one of a broad range of mitigations that may be appropriate. We do all we can to prioritise those individuals under the greatest threat, but there's a whole range of mitigations that are not necessarily run by the Northern Ireland Office, which is why I'm slightly unsure as to this particular case. But if she would like to write to me in this particular about this particular case, so we can I can look at it on an individual basis, I'd be happy to. But we do accept applications from members of the PSNI who believe themselves to be under threat as a result of the data breach, and these applications are assessed in line, as all applications are, with the scheme's admission criteria.
Thank you. Secretary of State, without wishing to put you in the role of a gentleman's outfitter, I just wondered if you wanted to put on the record your thoughts on what might be described as appropriate or inappropriate attire for a trial.
Yes, I did see those pictures, and I simply can't believe that happened. Just simply can't believe that happened.
So, court officials, judges, and members.
The Lady Chief Justice has also put on the record her shock over this.
Yes. Thank you. Let's turn to Claire Hannah.
I'm glad you said that. I think people in my constituency drive up part of it and see on an official billboard hoarding a UVF billboard like you would see advertising a breakfast cereal or a holiday company, and you see masked men going in, and I hope it just gives us a sense of the stench that comes off Northern Ireland and the conditions that people are still expected to live under, and that those logos of those men fly unmolested in many parts of my constituency and others, and I know you're not in any way condoning it, and I know you, and I'm glad you expressed your very clear revulsion about it. I just want to pick up on some of the funding issues that Carla outlined, obviously, that are impacting everyday and frontline policing and future policing through recruitment, and how acute they are. But obviously you'll be aware that there are two further pressures coming from the Supreme Court ruling on holiday pay and potential costs and claims for data breach that would really threaten to put the PSNI's lights out financially. And I'm wondering, what are you doing as Northern Ireland's representative around the Cabinet to try and give some comfort on those?
Yeah, so I mean the process, as I hope I described, is actually happening. So Monday evening, Northern Ireland Office were copied in on the submission that was sent to the Treasury, I think direct from PSNI, for their estimated and gradually crystallising costs of the data breach. And then obviously there's going to be a whole host of conversations, most of which probably will not involve me because they are straightforward and between the Treasury and Department of Justice and PSNI. But we are completely cognizant of both issues that she mentions. The first one is materialised kind of quicker in the conversation between the Treasury and the PSNI than the second one, but I think with the interim Chief Constable in place and hopefully a Chief Constable in place in the not too distant future, I think it's fair to say that the interim Chief Constable raised these issues with me when I met him last week, and I made clear that the importance of making sure that the information provided to us and the Treasury through DOJ, Department of Justice and Department of Finance was completely solid, so we can also advocate in this one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary of State, Mr. Speaker has granted a waiver on the sub judice rule, which allows us to ask this question in general terms. Your assessment, please, on the potential effect with regards to the legal challenges on the implementation of the Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act 2023.
Yeah, so there are a number of cases that have been lodged. I
think it's 4, isn't it?
I think it's more than that, actually.
Well, the court has decided to prioritise a number of cases, so a lead case and then several others.
They've prioritised 4, more have been submitted,
yeah.
Forgive me, yes.
Yeah, and so, and those initial hearings, I believe, will be next month. I think one case was actually lodged in England, the rest have all been lodged in Northern Ireland. And we would expect that to go through the whole of our legal system, because we will obviously robustly defend this legislation. And we hope that this can be done quickly, but obviously the legal system, we can't influence the timings of that. But
in an administrative point of view, do you press the pause button and wait? Do you
we
carry on establishing the infrastructure and architecture of the Act?
We carry on. Well, actually, as the Act says, this body, ICRIR, is we've set this up as independently as we possibly can. So Sir Declan Morgan continues to set up the architecture,
yes,
alongside his Commissioner for Investigations, who's now, I believe, on board, Peter Sheridan, and they continue to set up the architecture and build the body, and there are different dates in that, but I believe they have to appoint a number. The next thing, they'll want to continue appointing commissioners and non-executive directors to make sure that the governance of the body is completely correct. They're engaging with many of the victims groups and others, and to all be ready to open the doors and accept cases on the 1st of May next year.
And is it Treasury Counsel James Eady or somebody of that nature who's representing HMG in these proceedings?
I wouldn't think in the first instance it would be.
We have Northern Ireland Council as well as
the Northern Ireland Council.
Yeah. The first cases will be in the Northern Ireland High Court.
My understanding is that the Northern Ireland courts often operate with a greater degree of leniency with regards to the implementation of timetables and cut-off points that the courts in England and Wales wouldn't countenance. Any anxiety at all, or are the courts keen to expedite the hearing in order to address the main substance of the issue?
The courts are working at pace. We're working at pace to ensure that we're ready to do that. We don't expect any delays on that. I'm due to be swearing our affidavit very soon on this.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Last couple of questions, Robert Goodwill.
Thank you. With one or two schemes which sort of overhang from the membership of the European Union, including the Peace Plus funding, which is administered by the Special European Union Programmes body, but funded to the tune of about 840 million euros, about 75% comes from UK government. Could I ask, what role do the government and the Northern Ireland office play in the distribution of Peace Plus funds?
Yeah, well, the Special EU Programmes body is a separate legal entity in the UK and Ireland, and sponsored by both the Northern Ireland Department for Finance and the Irish Department for Public Expenditure, NDP Delivery and Reform. So it has a programme monitoring committee, which is the most senior decision-making committee for it, which is comprised of representatives from the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland Executive, and Ireland, which helps oversee the programme. The UK government is a special advisor to the committee and is one of the three parties in the financing agreement alongside the Irish government and the European Union, which sets out the terms and conditions for the implementation of the programme. But essentially that is the structure.
And do you think we're getting value for money from that?
Well, I think the first bidding round has either just about to close, or I think it's just opened, in fact. Yeah, that's right. It's just opened. It opened in earlier this month. And so it's a bit too early to say that we'll get value for money, but we are very keen to. And but you can see the reason we have committed so much money to this, as have our other partners, is that in previous generations of iterations of this fund, it has delivered good results for Northern Ireland and indeed the border regions of Ireland that where people can also apply from, and we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't believe this would help contribute further to peace.
And just to say, there's an evaluation part of the programme, and we'll be monitoring the budget and the development of the programme carefully to ensure that it is good value for money.
I mean, these are trusted interlocutors of ours, and they've so we are confident that we can do this. But as I say, because applications have only just opened, I mean, I've met with many organisations that have put together bids to apply for it, and there'll be a wealth of choices for the fund managers to choose from. So I think the opportunity to get both fantastic results in communities and good value for money for that is high.
So, obviously we're putting in 3/4 of the money. We are fully engaged with the way that money is being allocated, which reflects the percentage of our contribution, would you say?
I don't think. I'm not sure about the process. I don't think there'll be a vote on the committee as to I don't think it's going to be your Britain's Got Talent type whittling down process.
We're looking forward to your act, Secretary.
Yeah, no, I want the big red buzzer more than anything else. I'm very confident that our representation on that is appropriate to make sure we get the right value for money.
Okay. And in a similar vein, how, if at all, is the efficiency of Theme 1's local community action plans monitored during and/or after implementation?
So whilst we're not responsible for the implementation of the programme, there is an evaluation budget within the programme to which we have contributed. And now my department, the Northern Ireland Office, work closely with the special EU programmes body and the Northern Ireland Civil Service to monitor this carefully across the various themes of the programme, including the local community action plans. We also safeguard oversight through attendance at the Programme Monitoring Committee, which is the most senior decision-making committee for Peace Plus. I think you'll find that under Theme 1, Building Peaceful and Thriving Communities, action plans will be produced for each of the 17 local authority areas in the programme area, and they'll be designed to complement the community planning structures introduced as well. And this will enable and empower local community partnerships to self-determine and deliver priority projects on a cross-community basis, which should result in improved and shared and inclusive local services, facilities and spaces, which do make a lasting and significant contribution to peace and reconciliation.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretary of State, and your colleagues, and I thank you very much indeed on behalf of the committee for your attendance this morning. Thank you for taking our questions. Thank you for your answers, and we look forward to receiving further submissions to you on those points which remained outstanding. But thank you again very much indeed, and good luck with the House of Lords committee this afternoon.
The encore.
You've got a brace of scrutiny committees today, so good luck with that. Order.